Then we go into the story of Ashab al-Kahf, which was what we wanted to get to from the beginning, but we'll try to go through it as we can. So then this word that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses here, it's kind of something to change direction or to change in tone. Hasibta, right? أن أصحاب الكهف والرقيم كانوا من آياتنا عجبا. He's using this kind of special Old English, but I'll just try to say it in normal English. Or did you deem that the people of the cave and the inscription are a wonder amongst our signs or our portents? In other words, the story of the seven sleepers, as it was known, seems to be well known, or was well known, amongst people of the book, at least Christians. Imam Ibn Ashur has some discussion about why the Jews would know that story, because the seven sleepers, or the people of the cave, were, we call them Muslim, right? But they were followers of Jesus, because this was before the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And some historians have put them living around the time of 200, 250 years after Jesus, 200, 250 AD, something like that. And this was a time when the Roman Empire was at its height. And the Roman Empire did not become Christianized until Constantine. So before Constantine, they were primarily pagans, but you had pockets of followers of Jesus, right? And I call them followers of Jesus and not Christians, because Christian to me means those who came after the establishment of the church. So the first, people are not aware of this, but the first 400 years or so of Christianity, up until after Jesus, until 400 years later, there was wide disagreement and discussion about the divinity of Jesus or lack thereof. Was he divine, or was he part divine and part human? Was he somehow the Son of God or not the Son of God? Was he just a prophet? And there were people like that. And so to me, the true followers of Jesus were the ones who recognized his prophethood, but certainly not a divinity to them. And I can't believe that the people of the cave were ones who ascribed divinity to Jesus. So you might see some texts call them Christian, but in the sense that they followed Christ, not the doctrine of the church that was established some 100, 150 years after them. So that, two different things. And perhaps when they woke up, this might have been after Christianity, so to speak, had been established, after Constantine. Because if they actually slept 309 years, right, that would take us into 500 or so AD, then yes, that's after Constantine. So Christianity may have been well established at that point, at least in a form where they would not have been persecuted. But during their time, paganism was kind of more or less the state religion of the Romans, or of the Roman Empire. And it's said that there's wide disagreement about where they actually were physically in the earth. Some have said that they are now in what used to be originally Greece. Some have said Turkey, like the city that they name is Assus or Ephesus in Turkey. Others have mentioned other places. Some people have even mentioned Al-Andalus or Islamic Spain. So no one quite actually knows where they are. And you'll find places in Jordan, places in Turkey claim that this is the cave of the seven sleepers. But to say that we know for certain, we don't know for certain. We have no way of knowing that. There is a riwayah on Ibn Abbas that during the time of Muawiyah, in one of the ghazawat, one of the expeditions or campaigns, that they went north, and then they were told that this is the cave of the seven sleepers. And Muawiyah, who was the leader at the time, said, I want to go and see it. And Ibn Abbas told him, don't see it, because that's not for us. Right? That's something that's past and done. Nevertheless, he sent a group in to see them, and they tried to enter the cave. There was these fierce winds that prevented them from going inside. And so they didn't go inside. They didn't see it. Wallahu a'lam. That's a narration that is there. But it's not important to the lesson of the story of where they came from, or where exactly it was. But here, this, what we call iltifat, Allah is drawing our attention. Am hasibta. Did you deem that the people of the cave, wal raqim, and I'll talk about raqim in a second, what that means, كانوا من آياتنا عجبا, that they are something that is wondrous amongst our signs. Not really, right? Because this is a question, but in the form of a negation. In other words, it's not something so wondrous. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can give life to something and then put it in death and then bring it life again, then why is that so much different or so much more less wondrous than Allah making these people sleep for hundreds of years and then waking up again? What's the difference? So there's no ajab. It shouldn't be a source of ajab or bewilderment that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is able to do that. Right? And this is also going along with the theme of comforting the Prophet ﷺ tasliyah, to show him that even before you, right, there was these wondrous signs, but they're not so wondrous. And perhaps the Quraysh also were hoping to kind of trip up the Prophet ﷺ with this type of story. Right? It's, wow, they slept for 309 years, how's that? أم حسبت أن أصحاب الكهف كانوا من آيات والرقيم كانوا من آياتنا عجبا. It's not عجبا. It's something that is amongst the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what is this raqim? Here he translated it as inscription, as does Yusuf Ali. There's actually many opinions about what the raqim was. It comes min al-raqam, which does mean to inscribe. So some of them have said that the people of the cave, when they disappeared, because they disappeared out of nowhere, that they became sort of a fable and a story. People knew that they disappeared, but they didn't know where they went. And so the people of that particular town, they made an inscription and wrote their names on it and put it at the foot of the cave, or the mouth of the cave. That's one story. That's what the Raqim is. Or that Raqim was the name of the town that they were in. Another narration is that Raqim was actually the name of the dog that stood guard outside of the cave. Another narration said his name was Qitmir. Allahu A'lam. Again, the details are less essential than the moral of the story. But Al-Raqim can mean any one of those things. We don't know exactly what it means. So this is the beginning of telling about the story of the people of the cave. And it's important to consider that the next verse, verse 10, that the first thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about is the most important aspect of the story. Not that they slept home so many years and then they woke up again and that they found that the world had changed. All of those things are kind of incidental. The most important part, as he mentions here, إِذْ أَوَى الْفِتْيَةُ إِلَى الْكَهْفِ فَقَالُوا رَبَّنَا آتِنَا مِن لَدُنْكَ رَحْمَةً وَهَيِّئْ لَنَا مِنْ أَمْرِنَا رَشَدًا. Right? They ask Allah, when they fled to refuge to the cave, they said, "Our Lord, give us mercy from thy presence and shape for us right conduct in our plight." That's the most important aspect. That they turned to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rewarded them, right? Not just in this life, and He brought them out from that persecution, but in the next life. إِذْ أَوَى الْفِتْيَةُ إِلَى الْكَهْفِ. Right? And then they said to Allah, رَبَّنَا آتِنَا مِن لَدُنْكَ رَحْمَةً وَهَيِّئْ لَنَا مِنْ أَمْرِنَا رَشَدًا. Right? This is like dua al-muttar. This is dua of the one who has nowhere to turn except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَدُعَاء الْمُطَّرِ مُسْتَجَابٌ. Right? The dua of the muttar, the one who has nowhere else to turn, or feels in their heart they have no one else to turn, it's an answerable dua. Allah will answer that dua. And they literally had nowhere else to turn. And as the story goes, they were a group of young men who were living in this qarya, this town, and the Roman emperor at the time was a pagan. And he was persecuting people who followed anything other than paganism. And he requested of people to outwardly declare their allegiance to paganism and to sacrifice animals for the pagan gods. And so they were amongst a group of probably not that many people who were believers at the time, but they were amongst those who said they didn't want to do it. So one narration said that they were summoned before the Roman emperor, and they said that we can't do that. We don't believe in that. So this narration says that he gave them pause. He said, "Well, you're young men, I want you to think about it. When I come back, I would like to hear the answer that I'm looking for." So he leaves, and then they gather amongst themselves and say, "What should we do? Where should we turn? What can we do?" And they said, one of them said, "Well, let's go to the cave and just hide there and see what happens." Either this was a cave that they knew already, which is more likely the case, something that they frequented and maybe went to get away to seek refuge, much in the same way that the Prophet ﷺ would seek refuge in Ghar Hira, the cave of Hira. And then they went there and stayed there, and this is when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala caused them to sleep for those number of years. The narration with Al-Raqim, or the dog that was there, either it was their dog that was always with them, or it was a dog that was a stray dog. And as they're walking to the cave, he began to follow them. And whatever they did to try to get rid of him, they couldn't. He continued to follow them. So he followed them all the way there, and he stayed outside of the mouth of the cave and was there for the whole time, right? In some type of state where he's not really alive, not really dead, but just there. And so some of them remarked that how ajib, how amazing is it that even most people don't give much consideration to an animal like a dog today, but by essentially that he followed these people, these righteous people, and went with them, he gets a mention in the Quran. He is mentioned in the eternal, perfect speech of God, a dog, for that small act, or what seems like a small act in the Quran. So they remained in the cave, and the next verses will show us kind of some of the things that happened after that. فَضَرَبْنَا عَلَىٰ آذَانِهِمْ فِي الْكَهْفِ سِنِينَ عَدَدًا. Verse 11. Then we sealed up their hearing in the cave for a number of years. And this is a metaphor for them being asleep. Because when we think about sleeping, it means we can't hear anything that's going on around us. So it's a metaphor that they're no longer aware of things that are around them. And they slept for some of the Mufassirun, most of them interpret the 300 years, the 300 solar years, which equals 309 lunar years. Some of the Mufassirun take that literally, that they slept that number of years. Others take it more metaphorically, that that's what the amount of time people said they slept. But nobody actually knows how long it was. But it was kind of circulated that that's the number of years that they slept. Wallahu a'lam to which one might be the true one. ثم بعثناهم لنعلم أي الحزبين أحصى لما لبثوا أمدا. Then we sent them, right? Then we roused them, or after we raised them up, that we might know which of the two parties would best calculate the time that they had tarried, or the number of years that they were in the cave. So the two parties here doesn't necessarily refer to the people of the cave, but the people outside of the cave. People outside of the cave didn't know what happened to them. Some of them said that they went in the cave and never came out. And in fact, in the narration with the Roman emperor, it said that they followed their tracks all the way to the cave. Very similarly to when Quraysh followed the tracks of the Prophet ﷺ and found him at the cave as well, but they didn't find him. And similarly, when the Roman emperor gets there, he tells some of his soldiers to go inside and look for them. But something prevented them from going inside. They couldn't go inside. They couldn't actually cross the threshold of going inside the cave. And so at this point, that narration says that he ordered that the cave to be sealed. The cave to be sealed, and that, someone said to him, well, if they're in there, we just starve them. Same thing. So seal up the cave, and we still don't, we don't have to worry about them. Either way it works, we don't have to go in there. And that narration is that he completely sealed up the cave, and they were stuck inside. And that the cave was not opened again until the 309 years later, when there was a shepherd and he was looking for some place to keep his sheep for the time being, and he unsealed the cave. That's one narration. And then that's when they woke up, as is mentioned in the next verses of the Quran. So ثُمَّ بَعَثْنَاهُمْ, right? Then we raised them again. لِنَعْلَمَ أَيُّ الْحِزْبَيْنِ أَحْصَى لِمَا لَبِثُوا أَمَدًا. In other words, those who argued about where they went, what happened to them, how long they stayed, there were many different narrations. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one where he says in the next verse, نَحْنُ نَقُصُّ عَلَيْكَ نَبَأَهُمْ بِالْحَقِّ إِنَّهُمْ فِتْيَةٌ آمَنُوا بِرَبِّهِمْ وَزِدْنَاهُمْ هُدًى. Right? We will tell you the story. بِالْحَقِّ. In other words, no one besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The only one who really truly knows what happened is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. نحن نقص عليك نبأهم بالحق. We will tell you the truth. إنهم فتية آمنوا بربهم. They are a group, small group of young men who believed in their Lord. وزدناهم هدى. Right? And we increased them, or we advanced them in guidance, in iman. Another interpretation. وربطنا على قلوبهم إذ قاموا فقالوا ربنا رب السماوات والأرض لن ندعو من دونه إلها لقد قلنا إذن شططا. And we made firm their hearts when they stood forth and said. So here stood forth and said, either they said it amongst themselves, or they said it to the Roman emperor, which is more likely. إذ قاموا, where they stood, فقالوا, and they said, ربنا رب السماوات والأرض لن ندعو من دونه إلها لقد قلنا إذن شططا. Our Lord is the Lord of the heavens and the earth, and if we say something besides Him, then we should utter an enormity. Shatata, something that is, shat means really far away from the truth. Something completely inconsistent with the truth. We're not going to say that. And that they said this to the emperor, or they said it amongst themselves. هؤلاء قومنا اتخذوا من دونه آلهة لولا يأتون عليهم بسلطان بين فمن أظلم ممن افترى على الله كذبا. This is our people have chosen other gods besides Him, Azza wa Jal, though they bring no clear proof or warrant or conviction for them. And who does a greater wrong than who invents a lie concerning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. هؤلاء قومنا اتخذوا. So our people, they took gods besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Did they also believe in Allah and in addition other gods, or were they just mere pagans? No, Allah, not clear from the verse. We know that the pagans of Quraysh would say Allah, right? And the Quran says that if you ask them who created the heavens and the earth, لَيَقُولُنَّ Allah. They would say Allah created the heavens and the earth. But they associated partners, right? And they said about their idols, إِلَّا لِيُقَرِّبُونَ إِلَى اللَّهِ زُلْفَى. We have not taken them except so that they will bring us closer to Allah. However, these pagans, it doesn't seem that may have been the same thing. That they merely took pagans and they didn't actually believe in an overall Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Roman mythology was predicated on not having a central supreme Allah, but rather many gods. And that seems more likely the scenario. So, هؤلاء قومون اتخذوا من دونه آلهة. They have not taken Him, but they've taken other gods. لولا يأتون عليهم بسلطان بين. Right? Unless they can bring sultan bayin. Right? And sultan here means proof, conclusive proof. In other words, iman, it's not just a blind belief and following. Show us that these things that you worship have any power to harm you or to benefit you. Right? That is the argument against paganism. Show me that they can harm you or benefit you. This thing that you created, that you made with your own hands. How is it that going to harm you or benefit you? So if you don't have the sultan, a clear proof, how can you justify it? فَمَنْ أَظْلَمُ مِمَّنْ افترى على الله كذبا. So who is worse than the one who invents a lie concerning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Because if you associate partners with Allah, or you say there are others besides Him, it's actually a lie against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we'll just do this last verse before we take a break. وَإِذَا اعْتَزَلْتُمُوهُمْ وَمَا يَعْبُدُونَ إِلَّا اللَّهَ فَأْوُوا إِلَى الْكَهْفِ يَنْشُرْ لَكُمْ رَبُّكُمْ مِنْ رَحْمَتِهِ وَيُهَيِّئْ لَكُمْ مِنْ أَمْرِكُمْ مِرْفَقًا. And when you withdraw from them and that which they worship except Allah, then seek refuge in the cave. Your Lord will spread for you His mercy, and prepare you for a pillow in your plight. Yeah, that's not a good trend. I don't know. I can't believe Pickthall said that. But mirfaqa here would mean anything that is of a comfort and an aid for you. So nobody's perfect. وَإِذَا اعْتَزَلْتُمُوهُمْ. Right? And so they said that this is مَقُولُ قَوْلِ أَحَدْ أَصْحَابِ الْكَهْفِ. That this is something one of the people of the cave said. One of the, most likely the leader of them. So if you withdraw from them and what they worship, فَأْوُوا إِلَى الْكَهْفِ. Then retreat, seek refuge in the cave. And like I said, the cave here probably means a cave that was known to them, that they probably frequented before. يَنْشُرْ لَكُمْ رَبُّكُمْ مِنْ رَحْمَتِهِ. right? He will disseminate to you or spread to you of His mercy. وَيُهَيِّئْ لَكُمْ مِنْ أَمْرِكُمْ مِرْفَقًا, right? And He will prepare for you something that will be a comfort. It's almost like this person was prescient, like he knew what was going to happen. The one that, if it indeed is one of the people of the cave actually said that. And it said that the leader of the people of the cave, it mentioned some of the narrations that his name was Maximilian. And another name that was mentioned is the one who went to the town, his name was Malik or Malikha. So these were names that were Ajami, names that were, kind of Roman in origin, like Maximilian, obviously. But then they retreated to the cave. The dog remained outside, and then that's when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts them to sleep. And we'll resume after the break with the last few verses that deal with Ashab al-Kahf. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد وصحبه أجمعين وبعد. So we left off at the beginning of verse 17. وترى الشمس إذا طلعت تزاور عن كهفهم ذات اليمين وإذا غربت تقرضهم ذات الشمال وهم في فجوة من ذلك من آيات الله من يهدي الله هو المهتد ومن يضلل فلن تجد له وليا مرشدا. And thou mightest have seen the sun when it rose away from their cave to the right, and when it set, go past them on the left, and they were in the cleft, or the open space thereof. That was one of the signs of Allah. Allah guides whom He wills. He is indeed led aright, and whom He sends astray, He will not find a guiding friend. So the first part of the verse, وَتَرَى الشَّمْسَ إِذَا طَلَعَتْ تَزَاوَرُ عَنْ كَهْفِهِمْ ذَاتِ الْيَمِينِ وَإِذَا غَرَبَتْ تَقْرُضُهُمْ ذَاتَ الشِّمَالِ. We have to understand a little bit about the topography of the cave. And the Arab linguists, they say that if a cave has a big mouth, big opening, it's called kahf. And if it's small, it's called ghar. So Ghar Hira, for example, which is still there, and if you've ever actually traversed and went up there, it's a pretty small opening to it. Probably only one person can get through, 2 people maximum, from the opening of the cave. And a cave or a kahf is defined as an opening or a break in a mountain. So this kahf was large in terms of its opening. Many people could go in at once, and that means it also can get sunlight. So sunlight will go inside the cave. So this verse, وَتَرَى الشَّمْسِ إِذَا طَلَعَتْ تَزَاوَرُ عَنْ كَهْفِهِمْ ذَاتِ الْيَمِينِ وَإِذَا غَرَبَتْ تَقْرُضُهُمْ ذَاتَ الشِّمَالِ وَهُمْ فِي فَجْوَةٍ مِّنْ. That had the sun actually penetrated inside the cave, that it would have burnt them. It would have been hot for them inside. It would be unbearable, especially if this during the summer months. So that means there was a shifting of the sun so that it would not cast sunlight inside the cave upon the dwellers inside the cave, upon the sleepers inside the cave. That's why Allah says, ذَلِكَ مِنْ آيَاتِ اللَّهِ. This is from amongst the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that the sun actually shifted in that way for the sleepers of the cave to be safe. And then Allah ends the verse, مَنْ يَهْدِ اللَّهُ فَهُوَ الْمُهْتَدِ وَمَنْ يُضْلِلْ فَلَنْ تَجِدَ لَهُ وَلِيًّا مُرْشِدًا. Right? And this is one of those parts of the verses that sometimes people have trouble with. A similar verse to this would be فَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيُؤْمِنْ وَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيَكْفُرْ. Right? So here, مَنْ يَهْدِ اللَّهِ, if you read it literally, whoever Allah guides, He is the guided one. وَمَنْ يُضْلِلْ فَلَنْ تَجِدَ لَهُ وَلِيًّا مُرْشِدًا. Right? And whoever He misguides, again a literal reading, فَلَنْ تَجِدَ لَهُ وَلِيًّا مُرْشِدًا. You will not find someone to guide them. So taken literally, it seems that we don't have any choice in the matter. In other words, what the concept of jabr, right, that we're compelled, either Allah will guide us and then we'll be guided, or Allah will not guide us and then we'll be led astray. So where is the individual choice in that? And this actually is kind of shines a light on one of the most difficult concepts in all of theology. Not just Muslim, but Christian, Jewish, everybody grappled with that question, the idea of divine will and human will, divine omnipotence and human accountability. How does that work together? Because if we believe in complete perfection for the divine attributes, so if Allah is omnipotent and has power of all things, that means nothing happens without His will and without His power. And that is a tenet of faith. But at the same time, we believe that all human beings, if they satisfy the conditions for taklif, to be accountable, they're held accountable, which would be sound mind, intellect, post-pubescent, and has been able to receive the prophetic teachings in a form or in a manner that would render them then accountable for acting upon it. If those things didn't happen, then they're not mukallaf, right? They're not held into account, according to the majority of Muslim theologians. But yet, this verse, man yahdillahu, so it's Allah who guides, right? And Allah is the one who will put people astray. So how does that work with human accountability? And like I said, it's one of those difficult questions that people often grapple with. And I think I was asked that question in the car yesterday by Sidi Amr, actually. And I believe what I said to him, summarized, is that reality and creation is not merely or circumscribed by the sensory world. So we're not talking about some sort of, goofy Sufi understanding. No, this is a Quranic understanding that we have alam al-mulk wa alam al-malakut, alam al-ghayb wa alam al-shahada. We have the realm of that which is seen and witnessed. In other words, we can perceive it. And there's another realm we can't see. Right? Shaitan and his friends, يَرَوْنَكُمْ مِنْ حَيْثُ لَا تَرَوْنَهُمْ. They see you and you can't see them. So certainly there are things that are imperceptible. And it's a tenet of all religious traditions that there is a realm beyond that people cannot penetrate just by their five senses. You don't have access to them in that way. And that doesn't mean that they don't exist. They do exist. Right? And that's what we mean by belief. Right? When we say someone like, do you believe there's 10 cars parked in a parking lot, it's not a question of belief. Either you go and see it or you don't see it. But when we talk about belief, it means using faculties other than the five senses. In other words, that which makes us human, the ability to know about things beyond just sensory experience, is what makes one a believer. So, in the sensory aspect of things, in the realm of things that we can, that are palpable and we could perceive, we have choice. Definitely. And you feel it. No one can deny that, right? When I go outside and I turn on the ignition in my car and I move around and I say things that I want to say or don't say things I don't want to say, I feel like I am in control of that, like I'm making those choices. And that is absolutely true. So for zahir, right, in the outward realm of things, that's absolutely true. And by that outward aspect of things, I am going to be held accountable by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when He holds me and you accountable by those things, He is not wronging us. وَمَا رَبُّكَ ظَلَّامٍ لِلْعَبِيدِ وَمَا يَظْلَمُ رَبُّكَ أَحَدًا. So many times in the Quran, Allah does not wrong anyone. No one will be wrong. No one is going to be taken into account who should have not been taken into account. So there is this idea of human accountability or taklif. But at the same time, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala clearly is not from alam al-mulk or alam al-shahada. He's not from the witness world. Nor is he from really alam al-malakut. Because they're both created. Be careful. This is an important point. Allah is not from either of them. Right? Because we say that al-alameen, alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen, al-awalim, the different realms, the different worlds, they're all creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we have, on the one hand, the categories of the seen and witnessed worlds, ours, and we have the unseen, which is the realm of the angels and the jinn and other things, and heaven and hellfire. So that's there. That dichotomy is there. Then we have the dichotomy of created world, al-awalim, which includes those two that I just mentioned, right? Alim al-mulk wa alim al-malakut, alim al-ghayb wa alim al-shahada. They're on one side. And then we have something called Allah. So we have something called kulli ma siwa Allah, everything besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then on the other hand, Allah. And this world, or worlds, is nothing like Allah. No comparison. Cannot compare it at all. And so when Allah says about Himself, man yahdillah, so there is fa'al and fa'il, right? There's fa'al al-hidayah, wal fa'al huwa Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It can't work like fa'al and fa'il in the sensory world. It can't work like what we know of what we perceive. You know, I did this, I made this happen, because that's in the exterior. But inwardly, in something that's not really perceptible to all of, if not many of us, that's not the way it works. How does it work exactly? That's another story, right? And it's a story that can't really be resolved by rational theological tools. And that's not just my opinion, that's the opinion of people like Al-Ghazali, who was one of the greatest Islamic theologians, and many others after him, that you can't really get to those, you know, in other words, have an understanding that's based more upon tahqiq, of like kind of how it really works, more than taslim and tafweed. Much of our iman is based on this thing called taslim. In other words, acquiescence. Tafweed, putting agency in the understanding of Allah and realizing your understanding is going to be inadequate. It's predicated on that. You have to have that. That's an important part. Imam al-Sha'rani, however, amongst other imams, says that there's other ways to worship Allah. You can worship Him ala sabil al-tahqiq or al-kashf. That you can worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and He unveils to you some of these things. So the reconciliation, for example, of human accountability and divine omnipotence, in terms of speaking in just regular rational language, it's going to be approximate. You may never get a satisfying answer, and I'm just being honest with you. But in terms of unveiling, right, and appealing to not just your mere rational cognition, but your spiritual cognition, you may find the answers you're looking for, or a closer approximation of the answers you're looking for. Because even on a spiritual realm, all that we can know about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to be some type of approximation. We can't know Him in that sense, right? Because we are hadith, we are created, we're temporal, we are defined and limited by time and space. None of that applies to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at all. So how can we have a frame of reference for understanding that? He's not a body, He's not a wave, He's not a particle, He's not energy. He doesn't take up space. Space is inapplicable, time is inapplicable. So all of the things that you know of how you define things are out the window, completely. There's no definition, right? You can't clearly define Him in those sense. He doesn't have His own sort of genus and specifica. You can't, right? The way we say about human being, huwa al-haywan al-natiq, as the manatiqa, the logicians would say, the rational animal. Why? Because that's a definition that's jama and mana, that is all-encompassing. So man is from the higher genus of animal, in other words, a created living thing. But from amongst that, what specifies him, what makes him distinct from everything else? He's rational. He has ability to think and know and articulate, right? The Arab logicians, they said al-haywan al-natiq, the one who can articulate, right? Which is kind of a little twist on the understanding of rational. So it's a step beyond, not just rational, but you can articulate that rationality. And that what makes you a human being. But there is no such definition for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in that sense, right? Defining Him in that sense. So when we read these verses, right, sometimes there are other verses that are even more ambiguous, called ayat al-mutashabihat, that initially you have to read them with taslim and tafweed, right, with acquiescence. And tashabuh means it seems there's something similar about human attributes, right? And the verse, many of the verses that we're talking about, that talk about يَدُ اللَّهِ فَوْقَ أَيْدِيهِمْ الرَّحْمَنُ عَرْشِ اسْتَوَى, right? بَلْ يَدَاهُ مَبْسُوطَتَانِ. These verses that seem to ascribe human attributes, even physical ones, limbs, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, have to be initially understood by way of tafweed, acquiescence and taslim. In other words, saying, Allah knows what it means. But at the very least, I know what it doesn't mean. Right? And theology, probably 90% of it is predicated on what Allah is not what He is. So in other words, transcendence. When we say subhanallah, that's really saying Allah is not all these things that you think He is. He's way beyond that. So when I talk about how Allah is one, that's really a negative statement in the sense that I'm making an absolute statement. Allah is not one of many. He's only one. So I'm negating anything else. And it's no coincidence when we say La ilaha illallah, it begins with a negation. No God except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's a negative theological statement. So I am denying anything else could be Allah except Allah. Anything else could be God except God. And when I say that Allah is without partner, same thing. It's a negation. When I'm saying He is one, it's a negation. When I'm saying that He is not like anything else. وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ. Surah Al-Ikhlas. Nothing is like Him. That's a negation. In other words, I'm saying He doesn't take up space and time. He doesn't have physical limbs. He's not just really big. He's timeless. هو الأول والآخر. He is beginning without. He has been there forever without a beginning. He's eternal without beginning, and He's everlasting without end. How do you understand that? You can't really. Not from a rational perspective, because everything our frame of reference is within the finite and rational and defined. So verses like these, we look at it from two aspects. One, that Allah certainly has control over the whole thing. No question about that. Over the affair. That's a haqiqah. That has to be true. But in this world He has created for us, right, and it's a world of shadows and mirrors, which is true, but nevertheless, we are held accountable for what we do in this world. I do have individual choice, or enough of it, that I will be held accountable by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, I hope I didn't confuse people more than I intended. Yes? Yeah, that's what I was hoping to avoid. Guess I failed. Dr. Said rahimahullah has a book by that title, Al-Insan Mukhayyar am Musayyar. And I actually asked him once that question too. And I think he gave sort of a similar thing that I don't exactly remember, it was a few years ago exactly how he phrased it to me. But he is, as I said, Mukhayyar, in other words, you have the choice, and to the degree that you are accountable. And you are musayyar to the degree you're not going to be held accountable. So the Sharia, for example, recognizes that people who are compelled to do something are not accountable for that. So if someone like physically threatens you with violence or death to do something, to eat pork or drink wine, and you actually go and do that, you have not committed a sin. You're not held accountable because you didn't do it by your choice. You were compelled to do it. So we have the understanding that things you are compelled to do, there's no accountability. Right? And we have even things that are, if you do something involuntarily, like in your sleep, you go and you wake up and you burn down your neighbor's house and you went back to sleep. There is an accountability, right? We may still make you like pay the insurance premium or whatever it's going to be, but did you commit a sin before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you willfully did that? No, because you were asleep. Right? There's no accountability, there's no taklif. Someone ما استكره عليه والنائم حتى يستيقظ والمجنون حتى يفيق والصبي أو الغلام حتى يبلغ كما ورد في الحديث. There's no accountability for someone asleep until they wake up, or they are insane until they regain their sanity, or unconscious until they regain their consciousness, or pubescent child until they reach puberty. No accountability for any of those people, because it's seen that they're not making their own decisions based upon the faculty Allah has given them. So that's muhaqqaq, that's true. You have the choice when you do those things. But it would be a violation of an understanding of Allah's omnipotence to say that we do everything and even go against Allah's will for us to do it. That's not possible. We cannot go outside of Allah's will. So even if I commit a sin, from the realm of haqiqah, from the reality, yes, I did commit a sin and Allah willed that to happen. And it's not adequate to say He allowed it to happen, because it means, He didn't try to stop you. But no, He is the creator. He created you and everything that you do. So look at it from the perspective of, from my own understanding, perspective in life, yeah, I'm definitely doing what I'm doing, and I'm going to be held accountable. But part of the tanzih, part of transcendence of God and understanding divine attributes is that He has power over everything. So they seem irreconcilable. But yes, if we try to only reconcile them from the sensory world, we can't put them together. If we try to reconcile them from the non-sensory world, we can't put them together. That's why it's two different worlds, two different realms. But you can reconcile them between those two. Yes?
Shaykh Walead, hopefully this is an easier question. But you talked about the created world, including the heavens and the hereafter. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about us being in close proximity to Him in Jannah, is He unveiling Himself to the created world again, as He is, I guess, even in this world, in this realm? Or is there actual close proximity to Him in that created world?
Physical? No, not possible. Because Allah is not physical. It's not possible for Him. When we talk about taqarrub and وَكَانَ قَابَ قَوْسَيْنِ أَوْ أَدْنَى, we're not talking in physical sense. We're talking in a meaningful sense. It can't be that. So it is, yes, an unveiling more. So people will know more about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the next life, more than they could ever have known in this life. But even then, most of them say that it still will not be a complete knowing, because only the divine can know the divine. We don't even really know the Prophet ﷺ as he really was, because only a prophet can know a prophet. So I hope that helps a little bit. So we'll move on. We can. I'm going to leave time at the end if people are still not clear on some things. We can try to take it then. So the 18th verse. وَتَحْسَبُهُمْ أَيْقَاظًا وَهُمْ رُقُودٌ ونكلمهم ذات اليمين وذات الشمال وكلبهم باسط ذراعيه بالوصيد لو اطلعت عليهم لوليت منهم فرارا ولملئت منهم رعبا. And you have deemed them waking though they were asleep. We caused them to turn over to the right and the left, and their dog stretching out his paws on the threshold of the cave, that is. If you had observed them closely, you would have assuredly turned away from them in flight and been filled with awe of them. And the address here is to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. وَتَحْسَبُهُمْ أَيْقَاظًا وَهُمْ رُكُودٌ, or anyone who could have walked in on them. And the reason that they were asleep, but they didn't look asleep. So some of them interpreted that their eyes were open. So they weren't like asleep and closed eyes and like a normal sleep, but kind of almost like in a frozen state. You know, like you see in those movies with the aliens, the cryogenics, and it's like they have them in the, you know what I'm talking about, right? You're pretending like I don't know what I'm talking about. You know what I'm talking about. So they're in that state, right? And like you would think they're awake, but they're not. Nothing's going on there. They're not awake. وَنُقَلِّبُهُمْ ذَاتِ الْيَمِينِ وَذَاتِ الشِّمَالِ, and we cause them to turn over to right and left, but they're moving nonetheless. Why are they moving to the right and to the left? Ibn Atiyah and others, they said that if you stay on one side too long and you lay there for a long time, what happens? Like you become like, what do you call it? Huh? Bed sores, and you'll become physically, this will be malformed, and the clothes will be worn and all that type of thing. So the taqlib, right, was there. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did that so that that wouldn't happen to their bodies. Could He have done it without doing that? Of course. But the way that Allah's ayahs reveal themselves is in many different ways. So sometimes it's via these type of causes, asbab, and sometimes not. So نقلبهم ذات اليمين وذات الشمال وكلبهم باسط ذراعيه بالوصيد. And the dog remained outside the whole time, also in a similar state. لو اطلعت عليهم لوليت منهم فرارا وملئت منهم رعبا. If you were to see them, you would run away from them and you would have been filled with awe of them. Or Yusuf Ali says terror. Because a ra'b means there's an element of fear with it as well. So there's two different opinions about what actually, in terms of their bodies, what happened. Because if you sleep like hundreds of years and your body is functioning normally, like you're still alive, can you imagine how long your nails would have been or your hair after that time, right? It would have been like, probably you look like a big hairy, for a man who has a beard, you look like a big hairy thing. And nails, forget the Guinness Book of World Records, that guy who has 3-foot long nails. We're talking, way, way longer than that. So some of them said that that's what happened to them, that they were like that. Ibn Atiyah, and I personally feel that's closer, he said, no, that's not what happened to them. Because how could it that they woke up and they went to the city looking like that, right? People would have it would have caused terror to see someone in that form. But yet, by all indications, it seems like they went, and even though they had very old money, antique, right, and they were asking about things that were no longer there, but outside of this, there wasn't this strangeness to them. So Ibn Atiyah, I believe, and Ibn Tahir ibn Ashur, they say that their bodies remained the same day as if they woke up, later. And that's why when they asked themselves, how long were we asleep? What did they say? لبثنا يوما أو بعض يوم. I think we're out for a day, maybe half a day, part of a day. Because they're also looking at each other, right? Had they looked at each other and said, oh my God, what happened to you? And they would have said, well, you look the same way. That doesn't seem to have happened. So it seems like, Wallahu a'lam, we don't know for certain, that they were preserved in that way, and when they woke up, they only felt like they were gone part of the day or half the day, or one day maximum. You have a question? So the next verse, number 19, وَكَذَلِكَ بَعَثْنَاهُمْ لِيَتَسَاءَلُوا بَيْنَهُمْ قَالَ قَائِلٌ مِّنْهُمْ كَمْ لَبِثْتُمْ قالوا لبثنا يوما أو بعض يوم قالوا ربكم أعلم بما لبثتم فابعثوا أحدكم بورقكم هذه إلى المدينة فلينظر أيها أزكى طعاما فليأتكم برزق منه وليتلطف ولا يشعرن بكم أحدا. So in like manner we awakened them, that they might question one another. A speaker from amongst them said, how long have we tarried or slept or been here? They said, maybe a day or part of a day. Others said, your Lord knows best how long. Now send one of you with this silver coin unto the city, and let him see what food is purest, and bring you a supply thereof. Let him be courteous, and let no man inform of you or know about you, or feel your presence, I would translate it. So they wake up after this long period. One of them says to the rest of them, how long have we slept? Another replies, maybe a day, part of a day. However, a third one says, your Lord knows how long. In other words, he had a feeling it was way more than one day, right? How did he know that? Allahu a'lam. But he had a feeling that it was something much, much longer than what they thought they had slept. But they woke up probably very, very hungry, right? I can go the afternoon and then I'm hungry in the evening, but 309 years, no food. You must be starving. So, remember, they're still thinking that they ran away from the city where the Roman emperor was searching with his troops for them. So they wanted to be very careful about being seen and going outside. So they said, we have to eat something, right? So they assigned one of them, take al-wariq, with qasr ra means silver coin. Go to the city and try to buy something for us. And despite all the difficulty and all the things and how hungry they were, they didn't say, just go get me the Snickers or Reese's or whatever that you find there, but azka ta'aman, right? Find me the best. Not just any food, right? Because if you're really, really hungry, you're thinking, you know what, I can eat anything. It doesn't matter where it is at this point. But not these people, right? Not Ashab al-Kahf. أزكى طعاما, right? Bring us the best of food. وَلْيَتَلَطَّفْ, right? And let him be latif. And this I mentioned earlier, the ta in talattaf is the midpoint of the Quran, right? And the Quran is lutf. The Quran is ease and comfort and gentleness and mercy and compassion. وَلْيَتَلَطَّفْ وَلَا يُشْعِرَنَّ بِكُمْ أَحَدًا. And let no one feel your presence. In other words, be careful that you be found out, then they'll find where we are. But at the same time, surreptitiously try and go to the city and get something for us to eat. إنهم إن يظهروا عليكم يرجموكم أو يعيدوكم في ملتهم ولن تفلحوا إذا أبدا. The verse after that, for if they should come upon you or to know of you, they will stone you or turn you back to their religion, then you will never prosper. So this was their fear, that they'll be found out. But as it turned out, they were found out. So when one of them goes to the city, it's not mentioned here, the next verse talks about what happens after that, but when they go to the city and he tries to buy something with his silver coin, it's like an antique, right? It's like someone who came here to Toronto and had something from, the time of the King of England, King George or something, and you're bringing it and you're trying to buy something here. Be like, where did you get this from? Right? They recognized that it was from a previous time. And how could this young man have this coin? And so his affair was then communicated to the authorities in the city. However, what the men didn't realize that things have changed. And now that people of religion were no longer prosecuted, were no longer persecuted, were no longer abused. Some of them said that this was during the time of Theodosius II, which would have been after Constantine, and would have been someone who himself followed the teachings of Jesus or was a Christian. So if that's true, then they come back and everything has changed. And so keep in mind also that the disappearance of these young men was known, and it was kind of like this, the Qarya, the city was famous for that. People knew about it. They knew that there was people who disappeared, they don't know where they went, and they think they went to the cave, but they don't know what happened to them after that, because the cave was sealed. So he gets there, and then his news is brought to the authorities and eventually to the emperor. And then the emperor comes, and then he asks him these questions. Who are you? Where do you come from? And he explained the story, and at first he was skeptical, but then they go back to the cave to see what happened. Here is where there's different narrations of exactly what happened. Some of them say that as soon as the one who was sent, Maricha, comes back into the cave, that they all die at that point. Because then it's like the effects of being asleep for 300 years all of a sudden take effect. No one normally lives that long, and they're only kept alive just until that point. Other narrations say something different. But whatever the case may be, they get back, and they did not survive after that. They did not survive to get out of the cave when they go back into the cave. But nevertheless, they're discovered, and they realize that these are the same people that we were talking about, the famous story about the seven that, or whatever number it was, that had disappeared. And the next verse talks about that. وَكَذَلِكَ أَعْثَرْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ لِيَعْلَمُوا أَنَّ وَعْدَ اللَّهِ حَقٌّ وَأَنَّ السَّاعَةَ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهَا إِذْ يَتَنَازَعُونَ بَيْنَهُمْ أَمْرَهُمْ فَقَالُوا ابْنُوا عَلَيْهِمْ بُنْيَانًا رَبُّهُمْ أَعْلَمُ بِهِمْ قَالَ الَّذِينَ غَلَبُوا عَلَى أَمْرِهِمْ لَنَتَّخِذَنَّ عَلَيْهِمْ مَسْجِدًا. And in a manner we disclose to them, the people of the city, that they may know that the promise of Allah is true, and that as for the hour there is no doubt concerning it. When the people of the city disputed their case amongst themselves, they said, build over them a building, in other words, inside the cave or at the mouth of the cave. Their Lord knows best concerning them. Those who on their point said, we verily shall build a place of worship over them. And the two groups were the one group who were not committed so much to religion, and the other group who was. The ones who were committed to religion were represented by the emperor and others who were in power. That's why غَلَبُوا عَلَى أَمْرِهِمْ, right? They were the ones who were able to build a masjid, or a place of worship. Here it's called masjid, right? And it shows us also that even before they were the time of the Sharia of Muhammad ﷺ, that we still think of them as Muslims. and that the place that they worshipped in was called a masjid, not kinisa, not a church, but a masjid. Today, in those places that claim to have the Kahf and the seven sleepers, they call it church or so, whatever. But for us, we considered it a place of worship, a place of sujood, a place where people worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so that was built there. Some narration said that it somehow remained. Others say that the whole thing perished and was taken away in a flood or some type of natural disaster. Allahu a'lam, but that's not actually the point of the story. The point is that كَذَلِكَ أَعْثَرْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ لِيَعْلَمُوا. Right? We came upon them where we disclosed them, made them known, so they know that the promise of Allah is true. Right? And وَعْدَ اللَّهِ حَقٌّ. And what Allah promised for these people is true. وَأَنَّ السَّاعَةَ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهَا. And that the hour, there is no doubt about it. What's the connection between the two? The connection is, if these people can sleep for so long and then be brought back to life after they seemed to be dead, then that's the same thing that's going to happen in the hour. And there's no doubt about that too. So if Allah can do this, then He can also do that. And there's no difference within them. إِذْ يَتَنَازِعُونَ بَيْنَهُمْ أَمْرَهُم. Right? And then they disputed amongst themselves about what they should do next. Should they make them disappear? Should they bury them? Should they build a church over them? Should they close the cave? And then they decided, the group that dominated, we should build over them a place of worship or a masjid. سيقولون ثلاثة رابعهم كلبهم ويقولون خمسة سادسهم كلبهم رجما بالغيب ويقولون سبعة وثامنهم كلبهم قل ربي أعلم بعدتهم ما يعلمهم إلا قليل فلا تماري فيهم إلا مراء ظاهرا ولا تستفتي فيهم منهم أحدا. This is where the disputation about their number. So some will say they were 3, their dog was the 4th. Some will say 5, their dog the 6th. Guessing at random, rajman bil ghaib. And some say 7 and their dog the 8th. Say, O Muhammad, my Lord is best aware of their number. None know them save a few, so contend not concerning them except with an outward contending, and ask not any of them to pronounce concerning them. And there's a subtle indication in this verse that they were 7 is the closer thing. Why? Because he says, عز وجل, سيقولون ثلاثة رابعهم كلبهم ويقولون خمس سادسهم كلبهم رجما بالغيب. So this word rajman bil ghaib, right? Rajm means to actually throw. Right? Some things as rajm, to throw a stone. Rajman bil ghaib means they're just guessing. They don't know. So when the story is about 3 and the 4th is the dog, or 5 and the 6th is the dog, that's a guess. Rajman bil ghaib. وَيَقُولُونَ سَبَعْةٌ وَثَامِنُهُمْ كَلْبُهُم. But after he says 7 and 8, that they were 7 and the 8th was the dog, there is no rajman bil ghaib. So some of them took that to mean that the 7 and the 8, which was the majority opinion of the Muslims, and even later on, it got, in the Christian tradition, modified to say the 7 sleepers, right, based upon what Muslims thought it to be, that 7 was the closer number. قُلْ رَبِّي أَعْلَمُ بِعِدَّتِهِمْ. However, say to them, Allah knows the number, مَا يَعْلَمُهُمْ إِلَّا قَلِيلٌ. There's only very few who actually knew the exact number. So it's not that something you should worry about too much. فَلَا تُمَارِ فِيهِمْ إِلَّا مِرَاءً ظَاهِرًا وَلَا تَسْتَفْتِي فِيهِمْ مِنْهُمْ أَحَدًا. As the rest of the verse goes. وَلَا تَقُولَنَّ لِشَيْءٍ إِنِّي فَاعِلٌ ذَلِكَ غَدًا إِلَّا أَنْ يَشَاءَ اللَّهُ وَاذْكُرْ رَبَّكَ إِذَا نَسِيتَ وَقُلْ عَسَى أَنْ يَهْدِيَنِي رَبِّي لِأَقْرَبَ مِنْ هَذَا رَشَدًا. So then this is still speaking to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Do not say to something or anything that I will do that tomorrow, and then the continuation in the next verse, except if Allah wills, and remember thy Lord when you forget, and say, it may be that my Lord guides me onto a nearer way of truth than this. So as we said at the beginning, Sabab al-Nuzul, when the Prophet ﷺ was asked about these 3 things, about this, about Ar-Ruh, the Spirit, and Dhul Qarnayn, he said, I will tell you tomorrow, without saying, Insha'Allah. And so this verse is reminding the Prophet ﷺ, وَلَا تَقُولَنَّ لِشَيْءٍ إِنِّي فَاعِلٌ ذَلِكَ غَدًا إِلَّا أَنْ يَشَاءَ اللَّهُ. Right? So they call this ta'liq al-mashi'a, or istithna al-mashi'a. And it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. Right? مَنْ يَهْدِ اللَّهُ فَهُوَ الْمُهْتَدِ. Whoever Allah guides, He is the one guided. And so to understand that nothing will happen, nothing will go outside of the divine will, except by Allah choosing to do so. So we say, insha'Allah, right? Unfortunately, insha'Allah has kind of taken a negative connotation because of the way that Muslims use it, right? We use it like a maybe. You know, when your kids ask you, oh, are we going to go to the ice cream store after the dars? Yeah, insha'Allah. So it's a way for us to say, well, I don't have to do it now because, you know, I said insha'Allah, so maybe it's not going to happen. Or if I were just to say yes, then I have to take them, I have to go. It's actually the opposite, right? Because the Prophet ﷺ said yes to something, he didn't say insha'Allah, and it didn't happen. But when he says, or he's instructed to say insha'Allah, that means that you have every intention for you to make it happen, but you realize that it will not come to completion except if Allah wants it to come to completion. So we use insha'Allah the wrong way, right? We use it to get out of things, but we should use it actually to say, I have resolve and I'm going to do this thing. It's not an excuse to get out of things. And that's true with many of our adhkar, unfortunately. That common usage, I think we said it here or another form, I don't remember. People use hasbunallah wa ni'mal wakeel very wrong, right? They use it as kind of a rejoinder to someone who they're angry with. Like if you're waiting at the motor vehicle department line, not in this country, but let's say a country where it's hard to do, and you've been there for 3 hours and you get to the front, and the guy says, oh, oof, closing time, come back tomorrow. Right? And you've been there for 3 hours, you've been there all day, and you took a day off of work, and now they tell you, come back tomorrow. So most people are like, I can't believe this. Hasbunallah wa ni'mal wakeel. Right? Like we're yelling at them and we say hasbunallah wa ni'mal wakeel to like throw it at them. And hasbunallah wa ni'mal wakeel mean Allah suffices me and He is the one I depend upon. Right? So the meaning doesn't mean you throw it at people because you're angry and say, who cares what you do? Allah is enough for me. But you say in all of your affair, every affair is like that. Not just as a rejoinder, right, to get back at somebody. So these adhkar, which are also called al-baqiyat al-salihat, right, those baqiyat, those things that remain, salihat, right, they shouldn't be used in that way. They should be used in a way where you say them to imbibe either what's already in your heart or what you want to be in your heart. So when you say hasbunallah wa ni'mal wakeel, you want to really believe that, so you repeat it often. Or it's already in your heart, and your heart is saying that to you to remind you, hasbunallah wa ni'mal wakeel. So, insha'Allah, we have to do a reset how we use it. You know, use it in the right way, and even non-Muslims now know that about us, right? That if he says insha'Allah, he's never going to do it. وَاذْكُرْ رَبَّكَ إِذَا نَسِيتَ. And recall your Lord, remember your Lord, if you forget. I think Abu Sa'ud has something here I wanted to tell you. Ibn Abbas said about this particular verse, وَاذْكُرْ رَبَّكَ إِذَا نَسِيتَ, that even if it's something that you recall much later, right? In other words, you forgot to say insha'Allah, and then you recall, then say it now. In other words, even if you miss it the first time, when you promised your wife that you take her out on your anniversary, and you didn't say insha'Allah, and then it kind of didn't happen. So next time you say, or you recall, I meant insha'Allah at that point. Or you recall right after it. You can still say insha'Allah. It's not something that's khalas, it's done, it's finished. وَاذْكُرْ رَبَّكَ إِذَا نَسِيتَ. Even if you forget, you can always remember. And that's the beautiful thing about the deen, that it's never too late. Right? If you forget the tasmiyah before you start eating, if you forget to say Bismillah, then say Bismillah awalan wa akhiran. Say Bismillah in the beginning, at the end. You still have some nasib. You still have a lot, an allotment of the tasmiyah, even if you say it late. So it's never too late to say inshallah. Right? It's never too late to remember your Lord. It's never too late to redeem and correct a mistake. وَقُلْ عَسَىٰ أَنْ يَهْدِينِي رَبِّي لِأَقْرَبَ مِنْ هَذَا رَشَدًا. Right? And perhaps even the thing that I intended, Allah can even find a better way for me. Because when we say inshallah, it means that not just if Allah wills it, but I'm also putting a type of reliance and tawakkul in Allah that if He doesn't will it, maybe He's going to will something better for me, and He knows best. So if I say, inshallah, I'm going to do this and this, but maybe He has something better in mind, so I'm fine with that. That's why also I say inshallah. Not just that I want Allah to make it happen, but I want for Him to do the best thing. Not according to me, but according to Him. Right? And if you think about it, why wouldn't you want that? Why wouldn't you want what Allah wants? I rather let Him decide than I decide what I should be doing or what's best. So this aspect of kind of a nutq, of saying something, of pronouncing, and its connection to the heart in terms of tawakkul, reliance on Allah, is very, very important. And it's not just a word that's said, but it's heavy. And you can argue that a whole surah of the Quran, and one of the most important surahs of the Quran, is revealed because of the word insha'Allah, or the phrase or the sentence insha'Allah. وَلَبِثُوا فِي كَهْفِهِمْ 300 سِنِينَ وَازْدَادُوا تِسْعًا. And it is said, see how Pickthall says, and it is said. So he goes perhaps by the opinion that it was said they stayed this long, not that was the actual time. So there's two opinions as we mentioned. So either they stayed بالفعل, in other words, Allah is saying this, وَلَبِثُوا فِي كَهْفِهِمْ 300 سِنِينَ وَازْدَادُوا تِسْعًا. They stayed 300 solar years, 309 lunar years, or it was said about them that they stayed this long. Because if some people say if you do the math and you look at if they were around 250 AD and then they came back during the time of Theodosius, that wasn't 300 years later. That was more like 150, 200 years later. So it doesn't kind of jive exactly, assuming that the dates are correct, even for the dates of the Roman emperors. But again, that's not the main concern. The main concern is the moral of the story. And we don't say that these are metaphors that didn't actually happen. There are some revisionist historians or even theologians who go back, and they're not theologians at all, but let's just say for argument's sake, they call themselves that. And they'll say, well, these are kind of not real. It doesn't mean they happened. It just means there's a moral lesson in it for you to take from it. That's not what we believe. Anything that talks about this way in unambiguous language, like the people of the cave, we say, no, it happened. The Quran also doesn't give us the minutiae and the detail about when and where and how, but that's not important. It only gives us the important aspects, right? And those other aspects that people dwell upon for a long time, it's not our concern. Only these aspects. So it's not a matter of faith to know exactly where the cave was, or how long they stayed in the cave, or how many they were, because the Quran itself is telling us that they disputed about that, about all those things. So don't be too concerned with that. But إِنَّهُمْ فِتْيَةٌ آمِنُوا بِرَبِّهِمْ وَزِدْنَاهُمْ هُدًى. That's the whole thing. They are fitya, young men together. آمَنُوا بِرَبِّهِمْ, believed in their Lord, and we increased them in guidance and in iman. You had a question? That's true. Yes.
What's our kind of extrapolation?
Mm-hmm.
When we're saying we'll do it tomorrow, are we supposed to be saying to everyone, inshallah?
That's a good question. The question was about, practically speaking, even when we're in non-Muslim or work environments and people not aware of that, we say that all the time. Should we be saying it? Or should we say God willing, for example, something like that? That's a good question. I think ideally, yes, we would be saying it. But then again, I think you'd have to weigh that with maybe the reception that it might receive in whatever particular environment that you're in. If you think that it would have mostly negative reception depending upon your environment, right, then maybe you say it to yourself, right, or you intend it, or that sort of thing, and you may not have to be so explicit about it. And I think that's up to people's individual evaluation of their own situation. But certainly, if you can do it, right, and you know, I find myself saying it anyway, just even with non-Muslims, and like, what did you just say? I'm like, oh, nothing, sorry. So it depends. I mean, hopefully we can get to a point where people will know enough about us that that's not a big deal, and they're happy to hear it from us, or at least indifferent to hear from us. But until then, I think everybody has to figure out, you know, what works for them. Allahu A'lam. So the next verse, number 26. قُلِ اللَّهُ أَعْلَمُ بِمَا لَبِثُوا لَهُ غَيْبُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ أَبْصِرْ بِهِ وَأَسْمَعْ مَا لَهُم مِّن دُونِهِ مِنْ وَلِيٍّ وَلَا يُشْرِكُ فِي حُكْمِهِ أَحَدًا. Say, Allah is best aware how long they tarried. His is the invisible of the heavens and the earth, or the unseen of the heavens and the earth. How clear of sight is He and keen of hearing. They have no protecting friend besides Him, and He make none to share in His hukum, in His command. He says government, I would say command. So again, instructing the Prophet ﷺ, قُلِ اللَّهُ أَعْلَمُ بِمَا لَبِثُوا. Right, how they, and this gives evidence or weight to the idea that there wasn't exactly 309, that it was said about them 309. Because here it says, قُلِ اللَّهُ أَعْلَمُ بِمَا لَبِثُوا. Allah knows how long they were in the cave. So maybe it wasn't 309, it was said about them 309. And it seems to me that in the Christian tradition, the 300 solar years was something that was said about them, even in the Christian tradition, 300 years. Did they get that from the Muslims, or that's something they have an independent sort of sanad for that? I don't know enough about it. But this verse would kind of contend that it may have been said about them that, but Allah actually knows the exact length of time. However long it was something that was khariq lil-'ada, which means something way beyond you know, what people are used to. In other words, it was miraculous. Right? This was a type of karama. And karama means something that is given to non-prophets that are miraculous in nature. So in English, we may still call it miracle. In the Islamic terminology, we have different words depending upon who receives it. So we would call it mu'jiza if it was a prophet, and we call it karama if it was someone other than a prophet. And the reason the difference is there because mu'jizat, the word itself means al-a'jaz, to incapacitate someone else or to incapacitate. So the mu'jizat given to the prophets are incapacitating in that it's a clear proof to those who would refute the prophecy or the messengerhood of any of the messengers and prophets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that they are prophets and messengers. Because they bring something that is indisputable, right? No one could do that except God. When Musa alayhi salam cast his staff and it ate up all the other magician snakes, the first ones to recognize that were the magicians, the sorcerers themselves. Right? They said, this is not something we know how to do. This is mu'jiza. Right? He is who he says he is. Right? That's why they fell down in prostration. And they didn't care what Pharaoh was going to do to them after that. Because there was that recognition. So mu'jiza is different. Amma al-karama, then that's something that is an extension of a prophetic miracle for the followers of prophets. Right? So they're given this as a type of miracle. And they could be something similar to the mu'jiza, but we don't say that they do it as a sense to show, hey, look at me, I am this. For prophets, it's a proof for them. For saints And those who are given these type of miracles, awliya, we just say then that's something that is a gift Allah has given them. قل الله أعلم بما لبثوا له غيب السماوات والأرض أبصر به وأسمع. Right? This, those of you who are interested in the grammar, this is called sigat ta'ajjub. If you study that, anyone come across that before? Sin متممة الأجرمية, no? Sin Alfiya ibn Malik, I think, but sigat ta'ajjub means that you are not asking a question, even though it looks like a question, but it's more like an emphatic statement. Like if someone says to you, how beautiful is the sky tonight? You're not actually asking them to answer that. They call it what? Rhetorical question? So it's really so it's a rhetorical device. It's really more to make a statement. So, أبصر به وأسمع, right? How clear of sight is he and keen of hearing? Right? The basar and the sama', these are two attributes, divine attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, هو السميع البصير. And many of the theologians said that this includes all things that can be heard and all things that can be seen, but is different than the divine attribute of al-ilm, of knowledge. So if you look to the Quran, sometimes you'll find verses that will say, Allah, Wallahu basirun bima ta'amalun. And in other verses it will say, Wallahu khabirun bima ta'amalun. Why the difference? Why sometimes basir and sometimes khabir? Basir means he sees what you do. Khabir means he's informed or he knows of what you do. Or alimun bima ta'amalun. How come? They said, al-basar yata'allaq bil-mabsurat. That basar is connected to those things that can be seen. So generally speaking, when it says, Wallahu basirun bima ta'amalun, it means those things that can be seen or witnessed, normally by other people. Allah can see those too. Amma Allahu khabirun bima ta'amalun, then Allah knows of those things that can't be seen in people, like your inner intentions, what's in your heart. Right? Those things that no one else can see or know of, Allah knows them. So He knows جَلِيُّ الْأُمُورِ وَخَفِيِّهَا. He knows the things that people can have access to and the things that people don't have access to. So, أبصر به وأسمع, right? Generally, that's not something of the heart. Here, how long they stayed in the cave, people can have access to that if they were there, if they saw it. It can be seen, yeah. It has the ability to be seen, the capacity to be seen or to be heard. But no man or no person has seen or heard it, but Allah can nonetheless. ما لهم من دونه ولي ولا يشرك في حكمه أحدا. Right? They have no protecting friend besides Him, and no one shares in His hukum. No one could have done what He did in making them sleep 300 years or however number of years, and then waking them up. Right? So even though there's a parable in the story, it's reminding us of what we're supposed to know and understand from it, that in your own life, that's always true. You don't need a miraculous thing to happen to you. Your very breath is miraculous. You still being here 10 seconds from now is miraculous, in the sense that it is a will of God. It's a divine act of intervention. Had He not so willed, you won't be here 10 seconds from now, or 10 hours from now, or 10 years from now, or 10 days from now. That's why He says, don't think this is ajaba min ayatina ajaba. Right? أم حسبت أن أصحاب الكهف والرقيم كانوا من آياتنا عجبا. It's not that ajib. It's not that bewildering, because every moment in creation is bewildering in the sense that it would not have been there unless Allah wills it and makes it happen. Nothing is on automatic pilot. Nothing just goes by itself. Everything is a constant will of God. Whether they sleep in the cave 300 years or 10 years or don't sleep at all, or whether you and I sit here or we don't sit here, it's all the same. It's all the same to Allah. There's no difference. So that, the way that Surah Al-Kahf seems to be organized. Yes, go ahead.
I just had a question about Tawakkul and taking the means.
Mm-hmm.
So it seemed that when the Ashab al-Kahf fled, they were in dire straits and they didn't really have any provisions with them. But when they awoke, they had a silver coin. So is it the case that they took the means with them, or is it something Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provided for them at that time?
We don't know the details. It may well have been that they brought some things, but if you had an apple and then it sat there for 300 years, it's probably not an apple anymore. So we don't know exactly what they had, but they did have enough. They brought money with them. They had currency, so I think they had the means in the sense that they did plan to arrange for something. Wallahu a'lam. From the example of the Prophet ﷺ, we take means in everything, right? You can call the people of the cave, in a sense, they were maybe one of the first sort of political refugees, right? Because they were fleeing persecution, and they went somewhere that they didn't really know, that wasn't set up to handle them and to sustain them, but nonetheless, they didn't have a choice. Not much different than our brothers and sisters who got on boats from Greece or from Turkey or from the Syrian coast or from the North African coast, and they don't know what they're going to find and get on the other side. But whatever it is, to them it can't be worse than what they're in. So perhaps that was kind of the way that they were thinking. But from the example of the Prophet ﷺ, even when he makes his emigration to Al-Medina, he took many means, right? He took many, many steps. He took the coastal route. He headed south first and stayed in the cave for 3 days to throw him off the track. They hired a guide who was even non-Muslim to guide them there. They tried to throw him off the track even in Mecca by Sayyidina Ali staying in the bed and so forth. So there are many means that were taken by the Prophet ﷺ. So not even if you are in what you feel like you should be in a situation where Allah should give you sort of over and above divine providence because you seem to be in the right, no one should ever think like that. No one should put themselves in a position to make such a claim. Like somehow I'm going to be divinely protected because I'm such a great Muslim. That was not the way of any of our predecessors. And when they were given things like this, it was often because Allah gives it to them as gifts. Imam al-Ghazali recounts one of these stories, I think in the chapter on Tawakkul, and he said that there was a Shaykh, and that his students, his disciples, would be with him pretty much all day, and they never really saw him eat or drink or bring food from outside, and they didn't know how he was doing it. And so they went around his room, and then they found that he kept a loaf of bread under his pillow. So they took that loaf of bread. And so the next day, right, the Shaykh was disturbed. And he asked them, did one of you take the loaf of bread underneath my pillow? And they said, yeah, we did, but we saw that, somehow you're getting food and stuff from other places, and so we didn't think that you needed it. He said, I've had that loaf of bread always under my pillow, but it's so I don't make any claims. In other words, he's always prepared for food not to come. So he has a loaf of bread under his pillow, because he's not about to make a claim and say, I can get these things, and Allah gives it to me without me taking the asbab, without me taking the material causes for it. But when you removed that loaf of bread, then Allah left it to me. And then I became hungry. I didn't have a means. So the idea of the story is that even if you find yourself in such a position, don't ever take it for granted in the sense that you're entitled to such a thing. That's not the way of the awliya. They would never feel entitled, right? And they would hide such things like people would hide their sins. But in the outward of things, they would be people who were taking asbab and taking all of the precaution and all the things that they need to do, just like everybody else. Hada aslam, right? That's safer and sounder for one. Because it's very easy to fall into trouble if you start being impressed with yourself. That's why they call it idda' al-udal. The incurable spiritual disease is to be self-impressed. Because once you get to that, then you don't need any, you feel like you're self-sufficient. And when we get to the next story, Sahib al-Jannatain, that was his main issue. Right? Either they were two brothers, or they were related, or were not related, whatever the case may be, but the one who had an incredible garden with a river flowing in the middle, and date palm trees surrounding it, and grapes and pomegranate in the middle. Like, you can't imagine a garden like this. Probably nothing like it exists today. No one has a garden like it. So he's looking at this impressive garden, and he says, I can't imagine I can get any better than this. I did all this myself. He was self-impressed, right? And that which was led to his downfall. So, may Allah save us from that. So as I was mentioning earlier, the way that Surah Al-Kahf is organized, there are the four main stories, as I mentioned, but in between, like at the beginning, we sort of had an introduction to the idea of why these stories are important, right? And the idea of hamd to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and there's no crookedness therein, and so forth. In between, also, there is kind of sort of direction and instruction for the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So here Allah says to the Prophet, وَاتْلُ مَا أُوحِيَ إِلَيْكَ مِنْ كِتَابِ رَبِّكَ لَا مُبَدِّلَ لِكَلِمَاتِهِ وَلَنْ تَجِدَ مِنْ دُونِهِ مُلْتَحَدًا. So recite that which has been revealed to you from the scripture, right? مِنْ كِتَابِ اللَّهِ, the Quran. There is none who can change his words, and you will find no refuge beside him, right? Besides Allah. مُلْتَحَدًا. And this is a reminder to the Prophet ﷺ that despite these objections from the Quraysh, and despite all the enmity that you may find amongst them, at the end and at the beginning, it's always going to be Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There is no refuge besides Him, right? These young men, they didn't actually seek refuge in the cave. They actually sought refuge with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in that sense, we're all refugees, really. If you realize that you have no refuge except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that makes you a refugee, but a true one. And in this sense, it becomes an honorific. People look at refugees today as sort of, either they feel pity for them, they feel sorry for them, or maybe they disdain them. But being a refugee with Allah, that's an honor, right? That's an ennoblement. That's a noble person. So if you realize that there's no refuge, there's no sanctuary, لا مفر ولا ملجأ, right, except with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then that's the way you should be. And this is a reminder of that. And those people who went to the cave, they were actually seeking refuge with Allah. The cave was just a means. واصبر نفسك مع الذين يدعون ربهم بالغداة والعشي يريدون وجهه ولا تعد عيناك عنهم تريد زينة الحياة الدنيا ولا تطع من أغفلنا قلبه عن ذكرنا واتبع هواه وَكَانَ أَمْرُهُ فُرُطًا. Restrain thyself among those who cry unto the Lord at morning and evening, seeking His countenance, and let not your eyes overlook them, desiring the pomp of this life of the world, and obey not him whose heart we have made heedless of our remembrance, who follows his own lust, and whose case has been abandoned, or his own desires. There's also a Sabab Nuzul they mention about this particular verse, and you can almost say that it is something that all of the prophets encountered at one point or another, all of the messengers encountered at one point or another, is that most of the time those who choose to follow the Prophet ﷺ or any prophet were amongst the disenfranchised, the downtrodden, the marginalized of society. And some will say, well, that's because they have nothing to lose. And there's nothing better for them to do, so they might as well try something new because they have little to risk. And that those people who are of means, whether of physical means or of a kind of people who are seen as of rank and prestige and status in society, they have much to lose. And I would dispute that argument. Right? I would dispute that argument and say that those people who are downtrodden and marginalized, they have fewer veils between them and God from a particular aspect, in the sense that you don't see those things as enriching you. Those people, not everybody, right, but many people, of means, these things are veils. I just read the other day, it was off of Facebook, but it was a link to something else that said that some type of study that they did, that people of means are generally much, much less sympathetic and empathetic to people who are not. They're less charitable. And that people who have less means are actually more charitable than they are, relatively speaking to what they own or what they have. And they said is because they don't see that. They don't see people like that. It's like they're non-existent. And so if you're a person of means or of wealth, right, or of reputation, then oftentimes your identity centers around that. So I am this person, I am the son of this person, or the daughter of this person, I am this person of means, of wealth, I have this business, I have these things. And so you see these things as defining you. Whereas someone who's not of means, they don't have those things to define them. So what's left? They are at the mercy and at the will of their Lord, right? And they realize they're at the mercy and the will of something that's outside of their circumstances. So they're just a step away from acknowledging that it's Allah. And so they're much closer to that. Prophet ﷺ recognized this in the Masakeen, right? He said that the Masakeen will enter paradise 500 years before everybody else. And he said that I want to be amongst the Masakeen. وَحْشُرْنِي مَعَ الْمَسَاكِينَ. And I want to be with them the day of judgment. And he could mean the physical Masakeen, those who are destitute, as well as the spiritual ones. But there is a connection between the two. Not all people who are physically downtrodden and destitute are that way spiritually. Some are, some aren't. But there is definitely a relationship between the two. So early on, the people that accepted Islam, many of them, not all of them, there were people of means also, like Abu Bakr as-Siddiq and Uthman ibn Affan, Abdurrahman ibn Auf. They were amongst the first ones, and they were people of means, but many of them were not, right? Like Ali Yasir, Yasir ibn Ammar, and Salman al-Farisi. Even though Salman al-Farisi was a person of means and prestige and status in Persia, he was, more than any of those Quraysh. But when he left, seeking knowledge, seeking deen, he lost all of that. Because now he's in a completely different world. He's in the Arabian Peninsula. He's not the Prince of Persia anymore. He's in the Arabian Peninsula. He becomes enslaved even. Because he has no Arab tribe to back him. So he finds himself in slavery and he winds up in Yathrib, in Al-Medina, where he encounters the Prophet ﷺ, the very person he was looking for the whole time. So he was enriched in different ways. So people like Salman al-Farisi, Suhaib ibn Sinan al-Rumi, who was actually an Arab, but early in his youth, he went to the Byzantine Empire and came back, so they refer to him as al-Rumi. And the Arabs refer to anyone north of the Arabian Peninsula as from Rome, even though they were from anywhere in Europe, the Byzantine Empire. And others, Sayyidina Bilal, right, an Abyssinian also, not a person of prestige and status, a former slave as well. So the Quraysh said, you know, we'll think about your religion, but we don't want to be with those people. We don't want to be with them. Like, they have to be like separate majlis or something, like make a separate room for them. It's not becoming of us to be sitting with them, us and them in the same place. That's what they said. So what is this verse saying to the Prophet ﷺ? وَاصْبِرْ نَفْسَكَ مَعَ الَّذِينَ يَدْعُونَ رَبَّهُمْ بِالْغَدَاةِ وَالْعَشِيِّ يُرِيدُونَ وَجْهَهُ. These are the people you want to be with. These are the people that you are seeking. People like Abu Huraira, right? People like Salman al-Farisi, people like Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, right? Many of them were from Ahl al-Safa, the people of the bench. They didn't have any means. Many of them were former slaves or marginalized otherwise. These are the people who are seeking the countenance of their Lord بِالْغَدَاةِ وَالْعَشِيِّ, day and night. يُرِيدُونَ وَجْهَهُ. They don't want anything except their Lord. وَلَا تَعْدُ عَيْنَاكَ عَنْهُمْ. Right? Do not waver from looking at them. تُرِيدُ زِينَةَ الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا. Right? To see something of al-hayat al-dunya. And remember, for the Prophet ﷺ, he made da'wah to both groups, both to the downtrodden and both to the higher echelons of Quraysh. But here is a reminder that even if you think they can benefit you in your da'wah, these people of means, right? It's still perhaps, the way I see it, it's still perhaps something of zinat al-hayat al-dunya. Right? The belief or the assertion that perhaps they can benefit the da'wah. You know what? Only if we got those big businessmen and they became part of our donor list, we would do a lot of stuff. We got to kind of get those people with us, right? They're important because they got the dough, right? Or they have the influence. They have this, they have that. This is going to benefit the da'wah in this way, right? We need people like that. Then people, I believe this is saying, تُرِيدُ زِينَةَ الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا. Be careful, right? وَاصْبِرْ نَفْسَكَ مَعَ الَّذِينَ يَدْعُونَ رَبَّهُمْ بِالْغَدَاةِ وَالْعَشِيِّ. Be with the people who are truly seeking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If Allah is going to give you means, He'll give you means in many different ways. He'll give you people like Abu Bakr and Uthman and Abdurrahman ibn Auf, who are people of means and seeking the countenance of their Lord at the same time. But others may not be. وَلَا تَعْدُ عَيْنَاكَ عَنْهُمْ تُرِيدُ زِينَةَ الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا. Don't waver your eyes from them, seeking something of the dunya. وَلَا تُطِعْ مَنْ أَغْفَلْنَا قَلْبَهُ عَنْ ذِكْرِنَا. And don't follow the one whose heart has been taken away from dhikr, from remembrance. What good is their means if they don't have anything in their heart? وَاتَّبَعْ هَوَاهُ. And follow their own whim and caprice and lust. وَكَانَ أَمْرُهُ فُرُطًا من التفريط أو الإفراط. Right? Furuta means something that's out of balance. Either in excess, too much of something, too much whim, too much desire, too much something, or too little of something. Right? Too little taqwa, too little observance, too little remembrance. No balance. But seek the person that is muttazin, that's balanced, and his amr is not furut. Furut means it's like nothing. Right? It's only about them. It's only about themselves and their own desires and whims and passions. وَقُلِ الْحَقُّ مِنْ رَبِّكُمْ فَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيُؤْمِنْ وَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيَكْفُرْ إِنَّا أَعْتَدْنَا لِلظَّالِمِينَ نَارًا أَحَاطَ بِهِمْ سُرَادِقُهَا وَإِنْ يَسْتَغِيثُوا يُغَاثُوا بِمَاءٍ كَالْمُهْلِ يَشْوِي الْوُجُوهِ بِئْسَ الشَّرَابُ وَسَاءَتْ مُرْتَفَقًا. Say, it is a truth from the Lord of you that whoever He wills, let him believe, and whoever so will, let him disbelieve. We have prepared for the disbelievers fire. Its tent encloses them. If they ask for showers, they will be showered with water like molten lead, which burns the faces. Calamitous, the drink, and ill, the resting place. إِنَّ الَّذِينَ آمَنوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ لَا نُضِيعُ أَجْرَ مَنْ أَحْسَنَ عَمَلًا. But as for those who believe and do good works, we suffer not the reward of one whose work is goodly to be lost. And so those end the verses that refer to Ashab al-Kahf. Before that, the next verses now take us to, or the one after this, sorry. I made a mistake. Yeah, the one after this, let's just read that. أولئك لهم جنات عدن تجري من تحتهم الأنهار يحلون فيها من أساور من ذهب ويلبسون ثيابا خضرا من سندس واستبرق متكئين فيها على الأرائك نعم الثواب وحسنت مرتفقا. Right? As for such, theirs will be the gardens of Eden, wherein rivers flow beneath them. Therein they will be given armlets of gold and wear green robes of finest silk and gold embroidery, reclining upon thrones therein. Bless the reward and fair the resting place. So those ends the verses dealing with Ashab al-Kahf and kind of the moral lessons to be learned from that. And, Ashab al-Kahf were people who were tribulated and tried in their very deen. Right? That they couldn't actually no longer exist as they were practicing their deen. All the doors were closed. And that is one of the greatest tribulations. And that's one of the tribulations of the Dajjal, of the Antichrist, al-Masih al-Dajjal, that people will be tried in their deen. And it's one of the general tribulations. People can be tried in their deen, they can be tried in their wealth, right? They can be tried in their knowledge, and they can be tried in their power or responsibility. And those are the four parables in Surah Al-Kahf. The four different ways people can be tried and find difficulty. And so it's giving us sort of an example of where to put one's priorities and how to go about doing it. And that preservation of your deen, as the ulama of the Sharia say, is the highest priority. To the degree that if you are in a situation where you cannot practice your deen, it is incumbent upon you to find a situation where you can. You're not allowed to continue in that place at all. You have to leave. You have to find something different. So the hijrah for the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba, the hijrah of those who left Islamic Spain after the Inquisition, many of these emigrations that happened throughout our history often were people running away with their deen. Even for people besides us. The Jews left Andalus for the same reason. They were running away with their deen, and they fled to North Africa, Morocco, and they fled to the Ottoman Empire. They found sanctuary no place else. No one else would take them. Certainly not the Europeans, but they found it in the Muslim lands. So people fleeing with their deen is something that we have found That happens. It happens a lot, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we don't be tried and tested in that way, that we have to flee with our deen. But the Prophet ﷺ also mentioned in the hadith that the true muhajir, the one who emigrates, man hajar al-ma'asi, is the one who emigrates from his sins. In other words, from your own disobedience. That's a type of hijrah, right? To leave off and put aside for the sake of your deen, right? That it could be a physical emigration, but the more important one is the spiritual emigration, right? To leave off all things for your deen. Because even the physical emigration could be other than for Allah. One of the most famous hadith, Imam al-Bukhari starts with it, hadith niyya, إنما الأعمال بالنيات, right? And then فمن كان هجرته إلى الله ورسوله فهجرته إلى الله ورسوله ومن كان هجرته للدنيا يصيبها أو امرأة ينكحها فهجرته إلى ما هاجر إليه. Actions are by their intentions. So whoever's action or his hijrah is for Allah and His Prophet, then it's for Allah and His Prophet. But it's for some dunya that he wants or someone to marry, then it will be for that reason. So you could be going along with those, oh yeah, I'm fleeing for my deen, but you actually want something of the dunya, right? So one has to be very careful and aware and acknowledge the idea that even in my fleeing, I should be fleeing for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and not for anything else. And the first thing that you need to flee from is your own mistakes, your own self. And then flee to whom? فَفِرُّوا إِلَى اللَّهِ, right? Flee to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Run to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the next verse, 32, begins the story of the two men and the gardens. But since we're supposed to stop in 5 minutes, 6 minutes, I'll just take it in the next session. If there's any questions in the few remaining minutes we have, we can do that. Otherwise, we can. Yeah, Sufyan.
It's about the verse 6 of Surah Kahf, about is Allah Ta'ala reproaching Rasulullah or warning him to torment himself about without believing.
لعلك باخع نفسك على آثارهم. No, he's not. I don't know. He's not reproaching him. This is what the Prophet ﷺ, he actually believed that. He felt that. He's actually telling him, don't do that. Because the next verses say, what has been created of the dunya, لِنَبْلُوهُمْ أَيُّهُمْ أَحْسَنُ عَمَلًا وَزِينَةِ الْأَرْضِ. All of these things are there as a comfort to the Prophet ﷺ that maybe you're being too hard on yourself. So the Prophet, Allah wasn't instructing him to be that way. That's the way he was. That was the heart of the Prophet ﷺ.
Was he forbidding him to be in that way? To be sad about that?
I don't think it's, no. I don't think it's preventing him, but I think it's, because this is a matter of the heart. You can't prevent me, for example, from disliking or liking or loving the thing that I love. You can command me to it, but it doesn't mean it's going to change in my heart. But what he was trying to do is assuage him and comfort his heart by telling him that this dunya is, so temporal, so ephemeral, so unimportant in many ways that it's only a testing ground, and these people are being tested, and so don't worry too much, don't tear yourself apart over their rejection of you. And other verses do similar things, right? The verse in Surah Al-An'am that says, وَلَا يَحْزُنْكَ قَوْلُهُمْ, right? Don't be upset by the things that they say, right? إِنَّهُمْ لَا يُكَذِّبُونَكَ وَلَكِنَ الظَّالِمِينَ بِآيَاتِ اللَّهِ يَجْحَدُونَ. They are not calling you a liar, but they are having trouble with the signs of Allah and the ramifications that have for their egos. That's what they're rejecting. So all of these are called ayahs of solace or tasliyah for the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, because he was taking it to heart, so to speak, and it's showing us how the heart of the da'iyah should be. That he should, first and foremost, should have utmost concern about the people he's giving da'wah to. Not that he just wants to kind of do the minimum and then dismiss them and then condemn them all to hell, as many of the du'a do today. That's not the da'wah of the Prophet ﷺ. He was someone who, these were his cousins, his friends, people who grew up with, people that he knew, and he wanted the best for them, just like he would want the best for his family and himself. Yes, brother. Ahmed.
So, if they were like, the followers of Jesus alayhi salam, then why would the Jews of Medina be interested in their stories?
If, say again?
If they were Christians and the miracle happened to Christians, then why would the Jews of Medina be interested in their stories?
That's a good question, and Ibn Ashur raised that objection. The question was, if the story of the people of the cave was dealing with followers of Jesus or Christians, then why would the Jews of Medina have some interest in that story? Why would they have a record of it? He says that the way to reconcile that is either they had some awareness of it from Christians that they had known, number one, or it could have been something where every group kind of claims people for themselves. So rather than saying they were followers of Jesus, which most Jews would not say that, but they would say they were followers of Judaism, that they were Jews, they weren't Christians, and that they were following Jewish principles and not the teachings of Jesus when they were doing that. He offers that. He doesn't offer any proof for that, but he offers that kind of as a reconciliation to understand that. That's all I know about that. That's a good question. Anyone else? Yes?
So it looks like in the stories, like trying to get the moral of the story and get away from all the details that people argue about. But in the story itself, there's like, there's a mention of the sun reclining a certain way, particular way. It's mentioned. Like, what is the reason of that?
We said that was so that the mouth of the cave was very big, and before the cave was sealed off, presumably by the Roman emperor, that the sun's penetrating light inside that cave would have been harmful to the people inside the cave. So the sun would veer off from its light going in there by going east or west, depending on the time of day, so as not to cast light in the cave. And as an ayah, sign of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. ذَلِكَ مِنْ آيَاتِ اللَّهِ, right? So I guess we'll break here for dhuhr and lunch, and we'll resume afterwards, inshallah, and hopefully we'll regain some of our stamina to go on the rest of the day, inshallah.